The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast belong solely to those expressing them and do not necessarily reflect the OSIP Foundation Incorporated or any other group or individual. This podcast may contain dialogue or subject material that could be considered for mature audiences only. All aspects of how you play the game and the OSIP Foundation Incorporated are protected by copyright and other state and federal intellectual property laws. Unauthorized use without the express written consent of the OSIP Foundation Incorporated is strictly prohibited. If you're interested in sponsoring How You Play the Game, please email us at podcast@osipfoundation.org. Your sponsorship may be tax deductible. Hey everyone, and welcome to How You Play the Game, the official podcast of the OSIP Foundation Incorporated. Yours truly, Jack Furlong, here to tell you that this is part one of a special two-part episode. Sean and I are going to dissect the latest Star Wars installment, The Acolyte, and we're also going to talk about some of the sportsmanship-related issues that surround it because of the fallout that we've seen online and surrounding and related matters. Now, we recorded the episode and we realized, well, we got to split this into two. So this is part one of the episode, and then we will release part two in the middle of August, when we would normally release the one-off that I would do myself, and then we'll get back to our regular schedule the following month. So please enjoy part one of our podcast regarding the Acolyte. I'll kill you.
We're on the air.
Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Well, then should we restart?
No, we'll go with this.
We'll go with that? Okay, good. Yeah, that's a great way to grab people's attention, is just saying those three words to start on a sportsmanship podcast.
Oh, sure.
You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. For those who don't know, that was literally just an inside joke between Sean and I from our golf game this week, when he said something akin to, "No, you better, or I'll kill you." And it was so innocent that we had to take like a 5-minute break.
Out of nowhere. It came out of nowhere. And normally that wouldn't be so funny, but like within the context of everything else, which is a relatively long story, but it just made sense at the time.
It's almost something Tim and Eric. It's something Aqua Teen. It could even be something Family Guy almost.
Or C-Lab.
Exactly.
I could see C-Lab.
Yeah. In fact, you want the mustache on or off? Off.
Off, please.
Too bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I was I was thinking about that show actually a couple days ago, and I realized that, not to wax poetic on it, but like you had some really good voice acting on that show, and like really good it was just such a really, I don't know, like I don't know how to describe it. It's it had that 1960s animation style, right?
Yeah, like a lot of those shows, they just rehashed all that stuff,
right? And which is great, but like the premise was fantastic. I don't know how they survived down there. Like, to be with everything that happened. I mean, you were literally in a biosphere underneath the ocean, and anything could happen.
Yeah.
But like these people survived somehow. I don't know how.
Yeah. Well, it's the same theory as from Aqua Teen, where in the early days of the show, it was easier whenever they would throw something on the ground to have it randomly explode, so that they didn't have to keep animating it on the floor. Then, so they said, well, we're going to cut a corner here. Instead of just leaving this, this phone or whatever on the floor in the animation, we're going to have it randomly explode, and then it's gone.
Yeah, then you don't have to worry about it.
Exactly. And then it just, anytime something or someone dies, they come back the next episode, no questions asked. Very Kenny from South Park.
Right.
And but the voice acting in all of these shows, I mean,
oh, great.
Voice acting like that is so underappreciated, I think. And, the artistry that goes into that is so darn good. And you can, like, there are clips on Instagram you can see now, these voice actors who have been cast doing, so many different iconic characters over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And you watch them work their magic going back and forth and whatnot. It's pretty insane. I mean, you can watch Seth MacFarlane have an argument with himself as he
Right.
goes back and forth between Stewie and Brian. And
I feel like, not to interrupt, but I feel like
you will.
voice acting, I will, yeah. But I feel like, you asshole.
No, I know.
Except I'm the one who's the asshole. 'Cause
We
I
know.
interrupted you.
Exactly.
I know.
Yeah, and you'll kill me.
It is.
Yeah.
So I feel like the process behind voice acting has become a lot more informal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it used to be where, the actor would show up and do his vocal exercises and sit in a booth and like, wear a suit and like do these like professional, not that they're not professional today, but I feel like now it's a lot more laid back. You're in an environment. I was watching, speaking of voice acting, I was watching a special on Fallout New Vegas,
Mm-hmm.
the video game,
Yeah.
and the voice acting behind it. And you had some great gig. Matthew Perry was in it. You had Wayne Newton as Mr. New Vegas, and they were
Professor
set,
Joe Butcher from License to Kill.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had the room that in which they were was like decorated and was comfortable with couches and like it didn't even look like a recording booth.
Yeah.
And they would come in with their like in t-shirt and shorts and just do their thing, and it's pretty cool. It's a really neat it was a really neat experience to watch that and see how it was done. And Wayne Newton loved it.
Yeah.
He was all about it. He was like, I've never done anything like this before. This was such a cool experience. Like, I'm playing a voice. I am voicing a voice
Yeah.
on the radio, right? So, because you never actually see the character in Fallout New Vegas.
But if you did, it would look just like Wayne Newton.
Oh, it better.
Yeah.
I'll kill them.
Okay. You ever see there's a clip that Pete Holmes did from his stand-up where he was talking about voice acting, and he was basically saying, can you believe that some professional voice actor goes into a studio one day and he gets paid to do this. This is so cool, where he goes in and he's like, okay, Steve, we rolling? Okay. All right, Steve, we good? Okay. Headphones? Okay. All right. Good, Steve? Okay. All right. Sonic Boom. Shoryuken. Japan. And that's literally, he goes, someone got paid for that.
I think I vaguely remember that.
He does a better job at it because I think that the visual aspect of it is important in the show, because you obviously were not laughing as hard as the entire crowd was laughing at him.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Speaking of people that I effing hate now, welcome to How You Play the Game. The official podcast of the Yosef Foundation Incorporated. Yours truly, Jack Furlong, with you as we talked about what's going on as far as the world of sportsmanship is concerned. This is the first episode of the month of August. The year is 2024. You can check us out at osipfoundation.org. You can contact the show via email with the address podcast@osipfoundation.org. On social media, we're at facebook.com/osipfoundation. X and Instagram are at osipfoundation. Hashtag how you play the game. Across from me, as always, is the producer engineer, Mr. Sean Ryan. Sean, hello. How are you?
I want to get back on the golf course.
Well, that's tomorrow.
Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, glad we settled that. Yeah. Really breaking some new ground there, Copernicus.
That's one problem solved.
Yep. The big yellow one's the sun. Yeah. Okay. So today, here's what Sean and I want to do. Okay. We're going to examine the sportsmanship that has surrounded the fallout and the entirety of the show that is the Acolyte, which is the latest entry into the Star Wars universe. For those of you who are unaware, it's an 8-episode season uh, created by Leslie Headland, released on Disney Plus. In the Star Wars timeline, it takes place, I believe, about 100 years before the prequels. So you were set in this High Republic era, and it's supposed to give you a small look into the world of the Jedi as it precedes what we know to be the Skywalker saga.
Mm-hmm.
And it received not only mixed reviews, but the the way that people debated it, discussed it, and interacted regarding it took on such a life that I was looking at some of the articles that discussed it and tried to put a timeline on it and whatnot. Watched a couple of the videos and whatnot. It's actually pretty sickening to see what has happened as a result of people either trying to support, defend, criticize this intellectual property, and it's just crazy. So the way that we want to do it is Sean and I are each going to take a turn first reviewing it, basically just kind of getting on the soapbox and saying what we feel about it. After each of us have had our say, we're going to discuss it, as Star Wars fans together. And then finally, we're going to jump into the issues of the sportsmanship of the Acolyte and its reviews and what has happened so that we can highlight it and bring light to what has happened and create the discussion of what not to do, if you will.
Right.
What where we have fallen short in some of this.
Right.
So there will be plenty of spoilers. So if you have not watched The Acolyte and you don't want to be spoiled, we highly recommend stopping this episode now so that you can watch it.
Shouldn't be hard for a lot of people.
Most people haven't even gotten to this point, because I'm
Right.
sure that anyone who was trying to listen stopped after the phrase "I'll kill you."
Right.
Like it's some sort of weird Slender Man, thing that just, just, hey, I'm going to listen to how you play the game today. I'll kill you. Okay, well, not going to be listening to that, Yeah, pretty much. Okay, no, I get it. So anyway, why don't we dive into it?
Mm-hmm.
Sean, age before beauty, even though I'm older than you, and I will let you go first. And please give us your opinion, your review of
Okay.
The Acolyte.
All right. Well, I guess I'll start by asking the question: if you took out the lightsabers and the Force from this installment of Star Wars, would you still be able to tell that it's Star Wars? And you don't have to answer that. It's a rhetorical question.
I wasn't
But
planning on it because the floor is yours.
okay. Well,
I'll kill you.
And the reason why I ask that is because the overall feel of the show, in my opinion, lacked a Star Wars feel. I feel like the story itself was okay, but it wasn't a good Star Wars story. And what I mean by that is that in a Star Wars, right, you have an arc, right? You have a story arc where you have a protagonist who realizes their destiny or realizes their path, and they go on this journey. They meet people along the way, and they come to a realization that, this is the turning point. The root, the drama that the drama that occurs within the film is the result of the protagonist against the opposition, right? They realize what their enemy is, who their enemy is, and they fight that enemy via whether it's with an army or singular or, guerrilla style warfare, whatever. And they reach a middle point where they realize, oh, this is the climax of the story. Something big happens, and then there's a finale, right? And then the story sort of reaches it's sort of almost like how a Shakespeare play works, right? 5 acts. The big third act is the big turning point, and then we have sort of the downward motion with a final spike, right, for the ending. But and that goes for whether it's a movie or a show or a book. There's always an established there's always an established hero, right, in these stories. Whether that hero is male or female or alien, or it doesn't matter what it is, there has to be some entity, right, that propels the story along. I feel like the Acolyte was drawing from so many different aspects of storytelling that it just couldn't make up its mind on which way to go, because it felt like the story kept jumping around, whether that was going into the future or going being in the present and then jumping backwards with flashbacks. That's okay to do that, but like, maybe just start out with a flashback and then make that part of the story smaller. It doesn't take much to establish a story, right? Sometimes parts of a story don't need to be told because people already say what has happened. I mean, take a look at episode 4, for example, when Obi-Wan was talking with Luke inside his hut on Tatooine, and gave pretty much a pretty succinct history on Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker, and we don't know the specifics because we find them out later, and he mentioned the Clone Wars, and he was the best starfighter in the galaxy, Anakin Skywalker was, and then Darth Vader killed him. And that was all I needed to know at that point in time. And that established right away, within 10 seconds of dialogue, what happened and why we're here, why we're at the spot we're at right now. Okay, so I think something along those lines could have happened, and perhaps maybe in later seasons we could explore a little bit more. But when you're introducing a brand new story and a new plot, you have to right away establish who the hero is, what their destiny is, what's the story, who the villain is, who they're fighting, why they're fighting. Like what we need to know this within the first episode, or at the latest the second episode. I didn't really realize what was going on. I mean, I was following what was happening, but when I try to piece it all together in a grand storyline, it made sense when you didn't look at it through the lens of Star Wars, right? It felt like, oh, this is a new kind of story that would work great in another type of universe, but I don't know. It just didn't feel like a typical Star Wars story for me. So I guess the incoherence of the story as through the lens of looking through the lens of Star Wars was one issue for me. The other issue that I had, the big issue, was that typically when you make a Star Wars, and I say a Star Wars because it could be a book, it could be a movie, it could be a video game, it could be a show, it could be any medium. When you make a Star Wars, or more broadly, any sci-fi or fantasy film genre film, right? You have to have, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, you have to have character archetypes. In other words, you need a hero, you need a sidekick, you need a rogue, you need a damsel in distress, or someone needing help. Doesn't have to be a damsel in distress, right? That's just a figure of speech. You have to have a warrior. You have to have comic relief. You have to have a wise sage, and you have to have a villain. And if you look at something other, and I use this example all the time. If you look at Lord of the Rings, right? That's a fantasy. That's a purely fantasy film. That is like the epitome of fantasy. You have these characters established right away. You have Frodo, the hero, Samwise Gamgee, the sidekick, Merry and Pippin, the comic relief, Gimli, Aragorn, Faramir, Boromir are the warriors. Gimli even provides a little comic relief with his interaction with Legolas, the rogue, right? You have Gandalf, the wise sage. You have Saruman, and the orc army as the villains, right? Arwen, the damsel in distress, right? You have all these different characters that have clearly defined archetypes, right? And these archetypes help drive the story, help ground the story, and help it move forward, right? So look at Star Wars Episode 4. Luke is the hero. Han is the rogue. Leia is the damsel in distress. Chewie is the warrior. The droids are comic relief. Obi-Wan is the wise sage. Darth Vader is the villain, or Tarkin. You know, both the Empire, Darth Vader, Tarkin, they're the villains, right? So again, here's another example of these established, I don't want to say one-dimensional characters, but you have to have a specific type for each person, again, to ground the story. And the audience, you know, in a world where you have all these exotic locations and planets and settings and alien creatures, monsters, characters, narratives, complex narratives and storylines, you need these archetypes, again, to have someone with whom the audience can identify, right? To make it less complicated, to make it just, okay, here's what's happening. Here's the story. Here are the characters with their specific types that work together, right, against the opposition. That's the story, right? So you need a hero whose destiny is laid before them and a villain whose motivation is clear from the beginning, right? Now, let's look at the Acolyte. Who's the hero in the Acolyte? Is it May? Is it Osha? I don't know. Who's the sidekick? Who's the rogue? Who's the damsel in distress? Who's the warrior? I mean, Kalnaka and Yord could have been the warriors, but they died like midway through the season. We know who the wise sage is, and that's Saul, right? Who also kind of played a little bit of a hero role. But, I mean, compared to who May and Osha were in the show, Saul was the wise sage. And the villain was Chimere, right? The stranger, the Sith, right? And ironically enough, or unironically enough, those two characters who fit into their respective archetypes were the two strongest characters on the show, because they fit into those roles perfectly and executed them perfectly. You know, Lee Jung-jae did a phenomenal job with his character. He carried the show, in my opinion. Him and Manny Jacinto carried the show. They were both phenomenal. And no, this is the good parts of the show, right? This now I'm on to the positives, right? So they were phenomenal, and I was so impressed with how Lee Jung Jae learned English for this role. It was, it's like he was fluent, and he did such an amazing job and connected with his character. And what's most important is I, as a member of the audience, connected with his character. That's what you have to think about. You have to think about how the character connects, how the audience can connect with that character. Is it believable, right? Here's another great way to tell if characters are strong or not. And I take this from the Red Letter Media review I can't remember his name, but he reviewed the prequels and he asked this question. Plinkett, that's it.
Palpatine's
Yes.
behind it all.
Yeah. Palpatine's behind it all. And he came up with this great exercise where describe the characters without saying what they look like and what their role was in the film. And the more descriptive you can get, the stronger the character, right? So if you think of Saul, he's conflicted. He's trying to do good by everyone else. And wow, that was weird.
That was weird. What was that?
There's a little thumbs up.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
If we do thumbs up, does
Oh wow, that's weird.
something happen on here?
Yeah, that was strange. Huh?
Wow.
But
Plinkett's listening
yeah, I guess so.
and it wants you to do. Yeah. All right.
Thank you, Plinkett. But there's so many different ways you can describe Saul. Heart of gold. Stoic, wise. Sort of a teacher, or sort of knowledgeable, in touch with his feelings, but at the same time conflicted, right? Chimere, sort of like Heath Ledger's Joker a little bit,
Anti-hero, if you will.
Anti-hero.
Yeah.
Kind of a cool spin on a little bit of a psychotic side to him, but like he's been through a lot of trauma, self-realization, very convincing in terms of, hey, maybe the dark side isn't so bad, appealing to our inner sense of inner basic instincts as humans. The Jedi before this were portrayed as these, can do no wrong, totally detached from, not totally detached, but, don't become attached to, your loved ones, that sort of thing. Like, don't form attachments to the material, that leads to the dark side, right? Well, the dark side is in a lot of ways more human because it appeals to our baser instincts, right? And Chimere I connected with Chimere in that he sort of was able to say those things and be like, wow, it is more human to be a Sith, kind of, in a way. It can be. So I thought that was really great, and I thought those two characters really, I connected with those two characters the most. The last thing I'm going to say is the fight choreography was spectacular. And I feel like we kind of needed more of it. I feel like in episodes where, and I guess this is going back to, excuse me, my sort of not a good thing about the show, but I feel like episodes where there was no fight choreography, it was really boring. Like, I hate to say it, like it was uninteresting. But it shouldn't be like that. That's the problem, right? Because a good lightsaber duel is less about the duel and more about the internal conflict of the characters, right? Like the Obi-Wan Anakin duel at the end of Revenge of the Sith. That was a long duel. I mean, you could have said the same exact thing in 5 minutes on the side of that mountain, than you could have in the 45-minute long.
Same with at the end of the Obi-Wan series.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Like you could have said this, like when they were like in episode 4, when Obi-Wan and Vader were on the Death Star battling. That's all I needed to know, like about their relationship. Like it was, was it beautifully choreographed? No. I mean, the what was the guy's name who played the physical Vader?
David Prowse.
David Prowse could not see out of his mask, and they didn't know how to make lightsabers, like because they kept breaking, and like it was
you could
like
see the thing coming out of Alec Guinness's robe that's supposed to light the saber up. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like it was very clumsy, right? And so like there were technological restrictions to prevent it from looking nicer than it could have. But if you strip all that away and you look at the character, you realize, holy smokes. Here's a great example of it working in the modern day. The end of Rebels with Obi-Wan and Maul. 2 seconds. Told you everything you needed to know. I think that moment was one of the best. I will go on the record and say that interaction between those two in the desert at night, in that 2 seconds, the Maul, moving, being all fancy, and then Obi-Wan just slicing him right down the center. That said more to me about their relationship than anything before that. And that encapsulated perfectly the idea of it's less about the duel and more about the characters. And that was such a genius move. That was Filoni, right?
Yes, it was. And the symbolism in that moment,
genius,
because you can see the two biggest pieces of symbolism of the Kenobi Maul fight was that, first of all, Kenobi started with his normal fighting stance with the thing back here and the 2 fingers up,
right?
And then he quickly switched to the stance that Qui-Gon Jinn had in his fight with Maul in Episode 1.
Right.
And then the second part is that when Kenobi defeated Maul in Episode 1, it was a horizontal slice. And in this one, it was a vertical slice. So there was meaning behind that, and that forwards your thinking of how beautiful this sequence was in the smallest amount of time. Yeah.
And that's what I think. I think the Acolyte needed more moments like that. If you really want us to connect to a character as an audience, and you want us to identify with a character, you need those archetypes, and these relationships need to be established in the beginning so that they can blossom and grow. And then by the end, oh, hey, I remember, like something could happen where, oh, he did something in this way to reflect what had happened previously, right? So I don't have any more in terms of, I mean, there are little tiny specific things that I didn't care for which I didn't care. Like at the end of episode 7 in the Acolyte, the choice of soundtrack was disturbing. Like that had nothing to do with Star Wars. And not to mention the music in general was pretty milquetoast. I didn't really hear it. I didn't notice it. And the Force theme wasn't used. The main theme wasn't used. There wasn't some. You need those themes to recur. I mean, again, it goes back to my original question. If they took out the lightsabers and the Force, would you be able to tell it's Star Wars? If you had the music, yeah, you'd be able to tell. You'd be able to, you'd hear that and, oh, that's it. That's Star Wars. Okay. Yep, we're in it. But there was none of that.
Yeah.
It felt very bland. and uninteresting. So, and as a musician, and as musicians, we can, I guess, we're a little bit more in tune to that stuff, like
No pun intended. Ah.
hearing cues, right? There were no cues. It was just like orchestral hits and horn swells and it was like, okay, yeah, I mean, it fits kind of with what's going on, but don't you want something to tie into the story? Like, I know you said Kylo Ren's theme was played was it for Chimere?
Yeah, once or twice, yeah.
Okay. So,
But it
I
was
mean,
so muted, and you would never know.
I didn't even realize it until
Yeah.
you said it. I actually had to go back and listen, and I barely heard it. So, that's just autism.
Yeah. Tell me you're autistic without telling me you're autistic.
Right.
That's a Plinkett thing if I've ever heard it,
So I guess my sort of in conclusion, the lack of character archetypes did not ground the story for me, and it did not arc in a traditional Star Wars way. And as much as because Rian Johnson made this mistake too. He used the term subverting expectations. You don't want to do that with Star Wars.
Not with this intellectual property.
You don't. Star Wars fans don't like things that are different. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, we are bound by tradition. And there's a way, I mean, there's so many things that you can do within the framework of a story, of telling a story, but this isn't one of them. And The Acolyte, I feel like, was an okay story, but it wasn't a good Star Wars story.
Yeah.
And it just didn't do anything for me. Not to mention the acting was, oh yeah, I forgot to talk about the acting. Amandla Stenberg was just not, I feel like the first 2 episodes she was okay, but the more she realized how integral her plot was, how integral she was to the plot, the worse she got. And those kids who played the young May and Osha were just awful. I mean, they couldn't act their way out of a paper bag. It was just painful to watch. But again, here we go, because they don't have those. Another thing, again, it didn't help was they didn't have the archetype. They didn't fit into an archetype. Soul and Chimere did, and those 2 characters were very much the best actors on that show by a long shot. So, again, overall, I would probably give The Acolyte either a 4 or 5 out of 10. And that's entirely based on Saul and Chimere's performance. But although the last episode was pretty good, kind of tied something together. But I feel like, again, it was too little, too late. So yeah, I guess as disorganized as my thoughts were, I eventually came to the end, just like The Acolyte.
Yeah.
Aha.
I see what you did there.
Yeah.
As I'm writing all these thoughts down as I'm listening to you, so I'm going to save the ones that I wrote for our discussion together.
Okay.
And I'm just going to give you what I typed up to prepare first for my diatribe, and then
Okay.
I'll incorporate the other stuff later. You and I share a lot of the same opinions. I felt the show was very, very mediocre. There were a number of positives to it, but it also had plenty of negatives, and it just felt like it averaged out to a giant push. It was a giant tie. There was there was nothing about it that made me, if you were to take it away, I would have never known it was even there, and as you keep it there, I'm not, ooh, look at this, like there's nothing's moving the needle one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that I did eagerly await the show each week. It didn't feel like a chore to watch the show, and I think that that's a good thing, that Star
Sure.
Wars is doing, but there were more than a few times at the end of an episode where I would say, "The hell did I just watch?"
Right.
And as a result of that, that's where I was like, I don't recall that ever being something that I did in Star Wars other than for the sequel trilogy. Episodes 8 and 9 were such dumpster fires that those are the only times that I was like, what the hell did I just do here?
Oh
Can I get
God,
that
yeah.
time back?
I remember the ending of 8. I looked at you and was just like, what the hell did I
Yeah.
just
We
watch?
stayed up late for this crap. Um, I agree with you that Lee Jung-jae was the highlight of the show. He was the best actor overall. And he contrasted significantly from how bad some of the other actors were. Amanda Stenberg, again, she just didn't. I'm sure she's a fantastic actress,
Oh yeah.
but she did not have the chops for this role,
She was in
especially.
Hunger Games, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Yeah.
But also because the role was she played both twins. And as a result of that, you never really saw, like, I guess you could say that from the beginning, you wanted to see how the twins were very similar from that. We didn't even I didn't even know there were twins from the get-go. It took me into the first episode or two where nobody, in fact, nobody knew until the first couple of episodes came out that this was a story about twins. And as a result of that, like I kind of jumped the gun in it, and I was like, wow, they're twins. And then you find out later that they're twins, and I was like, okay, I'll buy that. And I would have expected those characters to really go, very, very separately. But the way that she played it, they were way too similar. And I get that based on the arc of these characters, perhaps by the end of the season, you wanted them to be similar again, but there was no contrast. There was not enough contrast in the middle. And I think that was probably because the same actress was playing both characters. And I also echo the fact that the twins who played a young Osha and May were I'm trying to think of a nice word here. Bad. Okay, it was just bad. I don't want to shit on these two girls and their acting career that lies ahead of them. But holy hell, that was
Needs
just bad.
they need some lessons.
That was 110% bad. I'm coming back to bad a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. I did feel like Manny Jacinto and Daphne Keene were solid contributors. I do agree with you that Manny did a fantastic job, and he went and because of his character and his chops together, that's why he was the second most interesting character on the show.
Oh yeah.
But I did not think that there was enough to propel them into being difference makers, especially compared to Lee Jung-jae. There were many other actors and actresses on the show who probably were trying to contribute a solid job, but because of Lee Jung-jae's superb acting and the way that there were so many bad acting jobs,
Right.
there was nothing to move the needle and to support these other characters. Okay. Carrie Ann Moss, I felt, was completely wasted on the show. Here you have this fantastic Canadian actress, and she's in 3 episodes. The first episode, she's killed off in the opening scene, and the other 2 are the flashback episodes that were abysmal. Okay, so you just completely wasted her. The 2 flashback episodes 3 and 7, were horrid. I like asking questions after seeing Star Wars entries because that wants you to dive deeply into the lore and into the discussion. I felt like after I watched The Phantom Menace, there were so many questions I was asking, and in reflecting on my 15-year-old self, I was like, those are the questions that a Star Wars fan should be asking. I didn't leave the theater after that thinking, what the hell did I just watch? Although there were many people who did. But, granted, this was what, 1999 when this, so it's time heals all wounds. But when I watched those 2 episodes here, I literally remember thinking, are you serious right now? Like, was this literal? Did I literally just give time to this? You know, the backstory that was created in those flashbacks was incredibly weak. Um, this idea of a vergence in the Force creating one consciousness and two people and whatnot. It really, by not answering more questions for that, you have created such ambiguity that skews the idea of Anakin Skywalker being the chosen one and him being created as a virgin in the Force and all that. Like you left so much ambiguity there that it really makes it problematic instead of plausible. You did not develop that part of the story enough, and the show was so all over the place that even if you had, you didn't give the viewer enough time to put the puzzle pieces together and ask the right questions. If you're going to go down this road, I think you owe it to the fans of the greatest intellectual property in existence to answer some of those questions so that other questions can be left for interpretation, like the ones that were left at the end of, say, Ahsoka. You know, how are they going to get back? What are they going to do? Like all this kind of stuff. Those are things you want to be asking questions about symbolism, and you want to be asking questions about meaning, and trying to really get some conjecture on some of these things. And you didn't do that as well with this. There was you asked us to connect dots that weren't, the leaps and bounds you would have had to do to connect the dots was just terrible. We don't know the true reality behind why the events on Brendock happened the way that they did. We don't know enough about that witch coven to know why did Mother Anastasia, in defense, try and turn into that black smoke thing to protect her daughters. And then why would Sol decide that stabbing her as she's turning into that smoke is the right thing to do? And why is it that if you're stabbing a ghost or a black smoke thing, that's enough to kill her? You've created, to go into this idea of, Star Wars fans like tradition. You've created so much new stuff in this intellectual property, which you're allowed to do, but you never gave us the foundation to understand why it was happening the way that it did, and it made no logical sense. Okay, why would Indara's intervention in the possession of Kelnaka in Episode 7 end in the massacre of all of those witches who are possessing Kelnaka's brain? Okay, you're asking us to assume so much, and I'm just like, why am I assuming this? Why do you want me to assume this? And in fact, to go back to the point about how Carrie Ann Moss was wasted, as I was writing this stuff up, I literally had to go back and remember what was her character's name. Like, I had to actually Google, it's Indara.
Yeah.
Okay? Like, that's how bad it was at times. I could remember Basil, the little sniffing rodent guide who was supposed to be comic relief. I can remember the names of Yord and Jecki and Sol and others, but why you wasted Carrie Ann Moss's Master Indara so much because of that. Okay. Right. Generation Tech is a channel that I was watching and trying to review some of the stuff. He made a great suggestion by saying that young Padawan Torben pulled a Leroy Jenkins in the way that he gets back to the witches camp, and he did that so I was laughing so hard, just like, that's our ticket back, Leroy Jenkins, and he just runs back and like, oh my god, he just ran in, I understand why Torben would Leroy Jenkins his way into the witches' camp in order to get home to Coruscant. He's so homesick, I get that. But I don't understand then why, after so many years, okay, he's going to take the Barish vow and then willingly drink poison. What I mean, you've made so many connections here. Maybe it would have been better if we didn't know what happened to Torben after the events on Brendock. Because by having him take the Barish vow and then saying, saying he would willingly drink poison and whatnot, like, I never knew that, between the events on Brendock and when he offed himself, that he was feeling guilty. Again, more dots you wanted me to connect. And that's, right. I'm like, no, you You have asked us to take so many leaps that the power, that we're just not willing to do that because it was never asked of us in the original trilogy or the prequel trilogy, and a large majority of the canonical series released, whether animated or not. If I have to ask so many of those questions, you're not doing it right. You said it yourself perfectly when you were talking about how I got everything I needed in episode 4. Okay, that's how you do it. Okay,
Right.
you didn't do it in this show. The budget for this show was almost $200 million, which was
Yeah.
more than Revenge of the Sith by almost $100 million. And yet the graphics and the acting and many other parts were so subpar. I was like, you're kidding, right? Is this Joe Biden inflation hitting you that hard? Like, what is going on? You have more money than God, okay? The choreography and the fighting were spectacular, but along with the music, which I will get to in a second, I felt like I was watching a rehash of The Matrix. And ironic because Carrie Ann Moss was in it. And I'm thinking, did we talk about how it would be funny to see Keanu Reeves show up in this too? I mean,
Yeah.
and I get it. The Matrix and like Star Wars and whatnot, you are using the same influences. You're telling the same type of fairy tale and different, so you're going to have these overlaps. I totally get that. I also understand that we are in the old republic, so I understand a lot of that, but there was a lot of stuff where I'm like, I don't know if this is a coincidence. There wasn't enough originality in this show to overcome the fact that you were going to use a lot of the same tropes. Not even the choreography and the fighting and whatnot could have saved that. I do believe that the 4th and 5th episodes of the series were exceptionally well done and entertaining. They could be some of the most riveting episodes in any episodic Star Wars entry created, I think. But I don't know if they're enough to be the savior of the series. Okay. I was glued to the television at the end of episode 4 when Chimere floated down and approached.
Mhm.
I am not a horror movie fan by any stretch of the imagination. That was a horror movie point, and I wanted to turn away, and I couldn't. And I made the mistake of watching it at like 2 a.m. And I'm like freaking out, like, oh my God, that is a good thing I'm an adult and I can separate reality from fiction here, because that was so well done, scary as shit. Not scary like jumping scary, but just like the sheer terror that you could see on the screen. I was like, wow. And I also thought that the payoff we got in the next episode with the fighting, the unmasking of Chimere, all of that, equally amazing. Okay, those 2 episodes together, I felt were stupendous. But the series was nowhere near the same after that. It was very, it was very Aquatine in that after you did Hand Banana and the Dickisode, the number of episodes that you released after that were subpar could not make up for the few episodes that were kind of good, and everything before those episodes was considered classic. So
Mhm.
it's like Peter Griffin doing the whole Surfing Bird episode, and then everything else after that, I'm just like, nope, Family Guy sucks now.
Right.
Um, I'm having trouble with the Cortosis helmet and how OSHA was possessed, and so was Chimere for that matter. If you want me to ask questions, that's one thing, but it didn't make sense because I couldn't connect the dots. Um, Chimere said that the helmet is described as cutting off all your senses. It's just you and the Force. Okay. So OSHA's in the helmet to end episode 6. We get back to her in episode 8. And all of a sudden, now it's possessing OSHA, and then it's possessing Chimere as well. And it's doing so in the same way that Mother Anastasia is possessing Torben. Like a lot of that stuff, those are a lot of questions you're asking of me to ask, and it's just
Mhm.
it was too broad. I need a little bit more. And then wait a second, Vernestra, who turns out to be the master to Chimere, she can sense her Padawan Chimera when she steps on the planet of Brendok because he's not wearing the helmet. But as soon as he puts the helmet on, she can't sense him. I thought that it was supposed to cut off the senses for the person wearing it, not the person who's nearby. So it goes two ways. There's so much that does not make sense with that.
Like Magneto's helmet from X-Men.
Exactly. I'm not saying that helmets can't possess people because we've seen that in certain aspects of canon before, but it's just if you're going to suggest these things, I need a little bit more of the backstory in order to want to buy into this. I don't mind the inclusion of Darth Plagueis because I think that did have me asking the proper questions, and we had discussed this prior. We started asking, is Chimere his apprentice, or was Plagueis just always looking for the answers to finding out how to create life and save the ones he loved from dying, and he happened to stumble upon this? There are a lot of different ways we could go with that. Those are good questions that we want to be asking. But the questions that we shouldn't be asking, is May good at the end of this episode? And a simple mind wipe just solves things? And OSHA is just supposed to be bad now? Like they switch sides, but I didn't buy it at all, And if OSHA really did turn to the dark side, as we are meant to believe at the end of the season, she really needed to do a better job of seething with the dark side when she killed Soul and submitted to Chimere. Okay? She stumbles upon the group of these guys on Brendok and hears Soul say that Soul was the one, in fact, who killed her mother. She starts to fill with rage, and she force chokes Soul. And then after that, we see her ignite Soul's lightsaber, and the Kyber crystal bleed from blue to red. And then that's it.
So, yeah.
Now she's bad?
Yeah. That didn't happen to Anakin.
No. And
sorry for interrupting.
That's okay.
That just
and you know what?
Me.
I'll buy the difference between OSHA and Anakin because I can start to ask the right questions there. What I need is OSHA to be seething with dark side power the way that Anakin was after he said, "What have I done?" Okay? Like right. he's gone after that. And I did not see these two characters, as they were supposed to be coming back together, and it just seemed so out of left field. It didn't leave me with any sort of at least a point of repose as we try and end the season. Like you said, the music was atrocious. And this is not to bash William Abels, who was the composer, but this is the closest to a traditional Star Wars attempt that we've had in a while, because this sort of thing could have been very much akin to a prequel type movie. And so I think it's necessary that we do get some basic John Williams motif usage. We did get Kylo Ren's theme a little bit every now and then, and we were left asking questions as to why we did get that. And Leslie Headland said she knew why she got it, but we didn't know the answer to that by the end of the season. So why did you leave that question open-ended? On the plus side, I mean, is she doing that to evoke the fact that Chimere is really, his real name is Ren, and he's going to be the one who starts the Knights of Ren? Okay. On the negative side, though, is she trying to infer that Chimere and OSHA are a dyad like Kylo Ren and Rey? If it's the former, where he turns out to be Ren, okay, that's interesting. Although the sequel trilogy is, bullshit. I understand why you're trying to do that. But if it's the latter, that's real bullshit. Okay. The buildup prior to the show and the fallout after the show were almost more valuable than the show itself in how we reacted to it. We made so much of the woke bullshit that preceded the release of this show, and that they said, oh, the Jedi are not going to be as good as we think, etc. And all it did was show that, okay, Jedi are fallible. They are, they're essentially acting as the cops at this time, and they're not villains. were we writing this at a time when in our current state of society, we were painting the police as evil? But that there was all this buildup for all that stuff, and then we watched it and we conveniently forgot about that. And I'm like, well, what was the point of that? Like you, I think I was just overall frustrated because I wanted this show to be something special, and it felt more like an entry into the sequel trilogy that I reject instead of an entry into the episodic lexicon that feels right. Many critics said that this entire story needed about 3 more passes through the writer's room for edits and whatnot, and I couldn't agree more. If you told me that Leslie Headland controlled so much of this series just because she demanded control and refused to mold the show for better, I would also believe you. I don't think that Filoni could have even saved the show himself. In fact, he was brought on as the chief creative officer, and I think that he saw this show happening, realized he wasn't going to win this battle, and just saved what he could. He wanted to be just the team player in order to try and save what he could of the intellectual property, and then he just washed his hands internally of the responsibility. Every other show that Star Wars has put out on Disney Plus has been solid compared to this show. They've had their ups and downs, and they're not without criticism, but this show felt like an art piece that didn't care about truly, every nook and cranny that we want. It didn't want to look at everything that every Star Wars fan wanted to examine. And I'm just disappointed that it could have been so much more. Well, that's it for part 1 of our podcast regarding the Acolyte. Stay tuned for the next installment, which will come out in the middle of August, where we will conclude this discussion and examine a couple of additional things regarding the sportsmanship of the Acolyte. Until then, treat each other with respect. How You Play the Game is a production of the OSIP Foundation, Incorporated. The producer-engineer of this episode is Sean Ryan. Music by Soundspring Studio. The executive producer of How You Play the Game is Jack Furlong. For more information, visit osipfoundation.org.